Yehuda and Yotam Cohen were promoting welcoming here to Adat Shalom. And we see the people here. There's quite a few more online right now, 70 or 80 people online right now who are watching. And thank you for joining us here for this evening. Is the mic on? Now it's on. Okay. Let me reintroduce Yehuda and Yotam Cohen for those who are online and watching, because otherwise they didn't hear. We welcome them to Adat Shalom. Yehuda is the father of, and Yotam is the brother of Nimrod Cohen, who's on our bima at the moment, who was taken on October 7th and is still a hostage in Gaba. Welcome to you both. Would you tell us about Nimrod? Who is he? What kind of person is he? Any embarrassing stories you'd like to share?
So, Nimrod is my younger brother. He was kidnapped at 19. He's going to be 21 in a month, in the midst of July. Nimrod was one of the few IDF soldiers was stationed on the Israeli-Gazan border on October the 7th, and amongst the first to engage with the Hamas terrorists on that morning. He was stationed on an outpost called the White House between the two kibbutzim, Nirim and Niroz, of the southern part. He was there stationed with Eden Alexander, who was released a couple of weeks ago. They were stationed there together. On that morning of the attack, they woke up at about 6:30, and they heard the sirens that was going on all around Israel. And they were hearing over the radio about the terrorists coming inside the kibbutzim, the villages, and that were starting to murder and kidnap the civilians inside their house. And so he and his teammates, he was a tank crew member in the Armored Corps of the IDF, and him and his teammates, with his commander, Omer Nutra, Lieutenant Omer Nutra, who was also an American citizen, one of the very few. And they rushed to the border to put themselves as a barricade in front of the terrorists in the hole in the fence. But unfortunately, they were outnumbered. There were just the four of them in a tank against a couple of hundred terrorists. And so the terrorists managed to put an explosive charge on the side of the tank to neutralize it. And then they managed to pull them out one by one, all four of them. Only Nimrod survived that day. The other three were executed after being taken by Hamas. We found about it thanks to a video that was shot by Hamas and was posted the very same day, in which we could see Nimrod being taken and dragged around the floor by terrorists. And that's how we knew that his teammates were executed, because you can see in the video that they're still alive. Nimrod was taken into Gaza alive, into Khan Yunis that day. Only after about 48 hours, the IDF sent officers to our house to inform us officially that Nimrod is a hostage, formally. But the first pieces of information we received about Nimrod were from hostages who came back on the very first hostage deal in November 2023. Two hostages told us that they saw him in captivity. One of them spoke with them. And this is how we knew that Nimrod was alive and that he was okay-ish, as far as possible in that situation. And this is how we've been living since that day. We got multiple pieces of information from the IDF intelligence about Nimrod during the war. The recent and the most prominent ones from hostages who came back on the very last hostage deal on February this year. Two of them, Yair Oron and Sagid Akilchen, were with Nimrod for more than 6 months, up until the very last hours before the release. And so they could tell us in details what they've been experiencing and how Nimrod is in captivity, the full experience. So they sat with us and they told us about everything they have been suffering in captivity, the torture, the starvation, the lack of food, water, medical attention, the fact that Nimrod had He had a rash on his left leg and an infection in his ear after, during captivity, the interrogation, the tortures. And even Eden Alexander was released a few weeks ago. We called my mom to tell her that he was with Nimrod in the first few days, weeks of captivity. They knew, they met before, and they met in the tunnels because they were kidnapped separately. I'll say this and I'll pass the mic to my father, that in the last 20 months now, we've been doing whatever we can to return Nimrod home. At first it was calling to increase the pressure on maybe Hamas and the mediators. But we've come to the conclusion in the last 12 months, that the only way to release Nimrod and bring him home alive to us, to his family, to his parents, is to end the war. And this is what we've been advocating for, a ceasefire and the ceasing of the war inside Gaza. And this brings us to today, basically.
Well, I just want to add, to put the realistic point on it, talking about the video Hamas released that day. I want just to describe it from my perspective. That day, in the morning, I was busy taking Yotam to unite with his unit. He was then in the army. He was an officer in the armored crop. They were stationed in the north. And only after I put him in the gathering point, heading back home, first of all, I tried to just put a WhatsApp sentence to Nimrod, how you doing? Didn't expect him to answer, probably fighting. But when I got home, starting connecting to the media, starting hearing reports of the invasion, reports of Hamas releasing their video to amplify and echo their heinous doings. So I just went to YouTube around 12:30 noon on the computer, writing Hamas attack. The second video I saw was the video of a tank going up in smoke. Then zoom in, showing one of the soldiers coming out. It was Oz Daniel. Didn't recognize him yet. But then camera moving leftward. In a defocus, I saw Nimrod. I wasn't sure it was defocus, leaning forward in the tank. And then I cut down to the ground where the final scan was shown. He's being dragged on the ground, saw him clearly there. I knew it's Nimrod. In the background, we see two figures lying down still, which were Oren Nautra and Oz Daniel, which lately we got, they got the information which they are not living anymore. We know that, especially from Yair Cohen, who was with him last 8 months, that Nimrod saw all his teammates being killed, being executed. Even we were told that he was forced to see replays of it. Hamas terrorists show him again and again how his tank mates were executed. So final thing, me as a father sitting in my house, seeing on my computer a few hours after the kidnap was done, seeing how he was kidnapped. This when I got the notion that my son is being kidnapped. At that time, Yotam was with his unit up in the north. We were there in the house, me, my wife Vicky, and my daughter, which is the twin sister of Nimrod, at home. Saw those videos on the computer. And a day and a half later, Sunday midnight, the delegation came, meaning the delegation from the army, giving us the final announcement, which is Nimrod was kidnapped, probably alive. And as Yotam said in the first deal, some of the hostages saw him there, so we got the first sign of life, which is alive and well, not injured. Along the time, we got what Army called sign of life attached to a date. And then the final sign of life was when Sagit Ekelchen and Yair Horn were released.
Before we go further, I want to ask you to talk about who Nimrod is as a human being, as a person, and just to share a little bit about not Nimrod the captive, but Nimrod the man.
Well, in short, I must say, Nimrod is a normal boy like every other normal boys. Love music, love trips in the country, love playing video games. Lately, in the last month before the kidnapping, he pretty much was attached to the Rubik Cube. He was playing with it everywhere. But in general, to be serious, Nimrod is a normal boy. We're talking about him not because he's had a past as a rock star or a sports star, a normal boy. And the only reason we are talking about him is because he was kidnapped. For us, as a family, for me as a father, of course, he's a special boy. And like every other parent, my children, as any other parent, are special for me. And I see it as my obligation, like every other parent obligation, to secure the life of my children. And this is why we are fighting for him. Must emphasize, I'm talking about releasing Nimrod. I mean, bringing home is nice. It's gonna happen later, but the main thing, I'm doing it for him, not for me. I want my son released. I want my son's life to be secure. This is my target. This is my mission. Get my son be released and his life to be secured.
We are three brothers. We are three siblings in the family. I'm the oldest, and Nimrod and his twin Romi are the youngest. But even though they are twins, Romi was born 3 minutes before him. So, as far as everybody's concerned, Nimrod is the youngest in the family, and we all act accordingly. So, for me, Nimrod is, and for Romi, Nimrod is the younger brother in the family. We all been in the same school. From middle school to high school, we've been in the same. We took the same classes. All the three of us, we've been in a hiking group. Both three of us were youth leaders and led communities and groups traveling all around the country, all around Israel. And this is one of the major parts. And Nimrod enlisted to the army to a combat role to protect the army, to protect the country in the army. We all share the same hobbies, still do share the same hobbies. Playing video game, the PS5 console, playing together on weekends, reading comics, collecting action figures. All the, like my father said, all the regular parts that every teenage, young adult boy do in Israel and all around the world. Nimrod was kidnapped at 19, less than a year after graduating high school. So he finished high school, and 2 months later, he was already wearing the IDF uniform. And he was kidnapped 2 months after finishing basic training. So only 2 months after being stationed there in Gaza. So even though he's a soldier and a hostage, and right now one of the most famous individuals in Israel, and sometimes around the world, but for us, he's still the same shy little boy he was. Like I said, he and Romi are twins, and me and him are boys. So he was always the bridge between us, both in the family, and we asked his friends after he was kidnapped we wanted to hear their perspective about him, and he was always the bridge and the one connecting people and supporting people, not only in our family environment, but also with his friends and his friends, several group of friends he had, and he was always supportive and was always there for them, and he's very much missed.
Yesterday was 613 days since the captivity of all these hostages began. And that means that Nimrod's been gone longer than there are mitzvot in the Torah. And for all of us who care, it's been a wild ride. It's careened up and down, both into ceasefire and hostages coming home and then back into war. And I'm wondering if you feel comfortable talking about how this has been for you and how it's, over the 613 days, your experience as the family of a hostage and also advocating to bring Nimrod and the others home has developed and changed. We read articles in the paper here, and we're aware of some of the complexities of the ways that the families of the hostages have been treated in Israel, both for good and all, sometimes not. And forgive me for asking you to relive even more difficult experiences, but will you talk about what it's been now for over a year and a half to try to get your son and your brother home?
Our view of this situation and our struggle has shifted a couple of times since the 7th of October. If at first we all believed that this is going to be over in a couple of weeks, tops couple of months, and that as soon as possible everybody, starting with the Israeli government and the international community, will do absolutely everything to ensure the return of all the hostages and that this will end very quick. And I think we've all saw that simply didn't happen. So if at first we did, at the very first we were working with the Israeli government, and we thought that the best way to release Nimrod was through pressure on both mediators, meaning Egypt and Qatar, and for them to pressure Hamas. We thought, and we truly, solemnly believed, that the Israeli government is doing its 100% very best to release all the hostages. As Israeli civilians, Israeli citizens, I was an officer in the IDF, Nimrod was a soldier. We truly believed in our country, putting politics aside and political view aside. We truly believe that the government would do for us and for the hostages what it's supposed to do. And I guess in a couple of months, after about 6 months, we saw that it simply doesn't happen. It simply didn't happen. More and more time passed, and there were no developments regarding the hostages. Every couple of weeks, we've been hearing about a deal coming up and a deal falling. And it's been repeating the same thing over and over again until about May last year, when we knew that there was a hostage deal on the table, just waiting to be signed. It would release a couple of hostages. Most of them would lead eventually to the release of all the hostages, meaning a comprehensive, a whole deal. And right about then, Israel, meaning by the Prime Minister's order, entered Rafah, which has collapsed everything, and we started from scraps, or at least the negotiating team had to start from scraps. And that time where we had many talks with, and many meetings with the Chief of Staff of the IDF, with the Minister of Defense, with the head of intelligence, head of the Shin Bet, many senior officers and many seniors elected officials who all told us the same things. They told us that the war could end and we can release all the hostages, but there are other reasons to continue the war. That someone deliberately, for several reasons, is choosing to prolong the war and not returning all the hostages. And in the same time, that Hamas is willing to release all the hostages, truly is going to release all the hostages. And this is what the head of intelligence told us, that they will do it on the one condition of ending the war. These things will always come together. There will not be the release of all the hostages without the ending the war, and there won't be the ending the war without the release of all the hostages. Meaning these things are inseparable as far as everybody is concerned. And from that point on, from about a year ago, we changed our mindset. And we understood that the only way we're going to see Nimrod alive, the most probable way and the fastest way, is to call for a ceasefire and the end of the war. because this is the only way that Hamas is going to release my brother. Hamas took him as an investment, knowing that one day they can trade with the hostages' lives to get what they want, to save their lives, to release Palestinian prisoners from Israeli prisons, and to end the war eventually. With that mindset, we started advocating for the end of the war, and at some point started criticizing the Israeli government's policies and actions regarding the war in Gaza. What started as minor criticisms, after more than a year of advocating and objecting what the Israeli government's been doing, we are now 100%, I think, in our perspective, against the prolonging of the war and whatever Israel is doing inside Gaza. We believe that the military pressure that once we believed in, I was once a part of as a soldier, has killed 42 hostages who were kidnapped alive and were killed in captivity because of Israeli airstrikes, because of ground forces, because of execution, because of many reasons, but could have been saved. 42 out of 250 is 16%, which is a lot of people who died. And we've been trying to do whatever we can to stop the war, and still are trying. And we started to realize that the only way that deals could happen is because of external pressure, especially American pressure. The recent hostage deal was signed on the 8th of January, happened because of the new administration pressure over our government. And the release of Dan Alexander is a prime example to that an Israeli soldier is released because of his dual citizenship. Nimrod and Idan are the same age, served in the same outpost, kidnapped together. There is no reason that one of them was released and one of them stayed there, just because of his citizenship, a foreign citizenship, which, to say the least, is upsetting. And we feel we are betrayed in some sort of way by our government, that they can end this nightmare, and someone chooses not to. And we've been living more than a year with the understanding that the war could end tomorrow if somebody chooses to. And this is not an opinion, it's a fact. We know from both Israeli sources and outside sources that there was always and still is a comprehensive deal on the table with the price of ending the war, which is the price that will have to be paid eventually, but someone still refuses to do so. And we've come here to DC, to the US for the 4th or 5th time, to plead our case, basically, and just asking for anybody who could help to help us.
I will put it in different words, which is the same message, but put it in a different angle. We pretty much fast learned that our government, Netanyahu's government, turned it to a political issue. A political issue in terms of satisfying his friends in the coalition, which were trying to use the Hamas attack for their political, ideological purposes, which was a permanent conquer of the Gaza Strip and rebuilding settlements. We can go from the beginning, if you know how the war went on. It started from the north, ordering Gazian civilians to move southward, with the hope that they will continue on and go into Egypt, and then the government can say the Gaza Strip is empty from civilians, now we can conquer it and build settlements. We know all along all the deal sabotaging Netanyahu led. I can even start with the first deal back in November 23. There were 8 days that every day 8 hostages were released alive with a minor price of 3 minor or women Palestinian prisoners. And on the 9th day, the government found an excuse to stop it, saying the list Hamas sent was not as agreed, meaning all women. There were partial women, partial elders. Hamas claims that it couldn't find all the women. which eventually turned out to be right. And most of those people on the list were later murdered because Israel went back to war. So this was the first sabotaging. As we went along, there were kind of games of getting a negotiation party to Doha or to Egypt, when Netanyahu limited the negotiation party mandate to talk about a deal, or even told them, you just listen, you won't give any suggestion. When a deal was starting to go on, Netanyahu or one of his government members went out and with revealing details from the deals to sabotage it. We can go to the occasion of end of August, after 6 hostages were executed because the IDF were maneuvering then. The Philadelphia corridor story. Well, it started with the fact that this area, this corridor that separates between Gaza and Egypt, the most vulnerable area, which means the area where Hamas can reinforce, was conquered last, only in May. As I said before, the maneuvering started from the north with the hope that the Gazian will flee south through this corridor. So when the government gave up and said, okay, no chance the Gazian will flee into Egypt, of course the Egyptians built high fences to avoid that. Okay, let's conquer that area, and then let's say, oh, now we just remembered it's the most important area, and Netanyahu found the reason to sabotage a deal, saying we cannot withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor. And when riots went up, meaning 750,000 Israeli civilians out of the street demonstrating by the results of the 6 hostages who were executed, so Netanyahu went to the second step. That means using one of his advisors to link original documents who were captured in Gaza, referring it to Sinwar, which was not, that Hamas has a plan to smuggle hostages underneath the Philadelphia corridor, so then we cannot withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor. That was a lie. That was endangering hostages and soldiers during a war by, again, linking confidential original documents. And when that was to try to devoid the Israeli public, so they will turn down riots. And when this was not enough, he had his wife, the Mrs. Netanyahu, talking in front of families of hostages, actually frightening them, saying, did you read what the German Bild wrote, that Hamas is, Sinwar is planning to smuggle hostages, etc. I call it then, the Mrs. Netanyahu is practicing psychological terror on the families. So this is another example of sabotaging a deal. Of course, we can go to the recent deal, which Hamas breached, which Netanyahu breached it. 2 points. One, that the government didn't send a negotiation party on the 16th day to negotiate the second part. And the second thing, again, Philadelphia corridor, Netanyahu ordered the IDF not to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor on the 50 days as agreed in the agreement of the first deal. This got us to a pause, which is until now, no other hostages except in Alexander were released.
A few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., 2 lovely young people, Yaron and Sarah, were shot to death outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum. Our community was there the next day. This is a huge tragedy for us, an escalation in the violence surrounding the war and anti-Semitism in general that we're seeing in the United States. I'm wondering how the murders of those 2 are being spoken about or being dealt with from within Israel.
Well, let's say, talking about our government, they use this to justify the war. Well, actually, the things are opposite. Getting a ceasefire, going through ending the war, which will decrease anti-Semitism. Now, the government are not only blaming the fact that everybody is calling for ceasefire, that was the cause of the attack of the two diplomats. They're even accusing the head of the opposition in Israel, saying because of what Yair Golan said, accusing the government that they are for killing Palestinian children, that's why two diplomats were murdered. So I can put the term the poison machine, and our government not only avoiding the end of the war, not only avoiding the release of hostages, they are actually practicing their poison machine on the opposition and on us in particular. I mean, I was accused that I'm a Hamas supporter because I wanted to, I was advocating for ending the war and getting a hostage deal, getting my son released.
The 7th of October sparked a wave of anti-Semitism all around the world, and I'm sure you're far more familiar than me in this case. But as long as the war goes on, and as more as footage of what is happening inside Gaza is going out to the world, this situation or the perception of Israel and the Jewish people is deteriorating rapidly. We in Israel, we see what is happening in the world, and the Jewish people is one. We do feel for one another, just like the Jews in diaspora felt for us on the 7th of October. We feel whenever there is a terror attack, just like you had here in DC and what happened in Colorado in the Run for the Lives event. But people in Israel don't realize the effect of the war in Gaza in the international perception. The fact that the photos from Gaza, the bombings of children, of civilians, which are happening, these photos are being shown in Israeli medias and in Israeli channels. And so the average Israeli doesn't know, or at least doesn't want to know, and doesn't get delivered these photos. And for them to understand how this, for people in Israel to understand how this affects the Jews in diaspora, there is a miscommunication. We know that as long as the war continues, and as long as the IDF do things that some consider war crimes, that some consider unethical, and there are photos who can prove one way or another, but there are evidence of this. And as long as this continues, the way that the world views us as Israelis, and I think as Jewish, will also be worse and worse as the time goes on. This is one of the parts we've been advocating for the end of the war, because just like the 7th of October and this war sparked this flame of anti-Semitism, which has been affecting all of us, we think that the end of the war will also put it out in some sort of way. Yeah.
Let me ask you one more question, then I'm going to open it up to a few questions from the community. I've only been back once since October 7th, but even then it was clear to me that Israel has changed profoundly. The bumper stickers even are different. And forgive me for saying more to the point about feelings about the war. And about what it needs to be done. And both our countries actually have changed in immense and unpredictable and, in my mind, terrible ways over the last few years. From your personal perspective, how has Israel changed since October 7th, and what do you see for the future?
Whenever you come to Israel, if you land in Ben Gurion Airport and you go to Tel Aviv, the first thing you see is the amount of the stickers hanging on the walls. And there is a tradition that I think started after the 7th of October that for every hostage or civilian killed during and after the 7th of October, there is a sticker with his photo and a special quote about him for everybody to remember him. And everywhere you go around in Israel, in this past 20 months, you always see those stickers. They stick out and catch your eyesight. So when you're walking in public spaces in Israel, the first and the most, I think, prominent thing you see is the amount of beautiful people who have fallen and still are falling ever since the 7th of October. And during weeks like that, in the last week, we lost 8 soldiers in Gaza. You see 8 more stickers, faces you haven't seen before. And I think that this example, I think, conveys the bigger feeling of what is happening inside Israel. We are a country in shock. We haven't even started to process the trauma of what happened to us in the 7th of October because we're still experiencing this. So even talking about PTSD, people are still experiencing, so they cannot view it in past tense. We're still living and reliving the 7th of October because my brother is still a captive, because soldiers are still dying, because we still feel like we cannot start rebuild because the Israeli people is divided between themselves because there is a lot of political pressure in both ways. And the sad part is that it's getting worse and worse. As long as the war continues and people disagree with each other and people are dying and blaming the death on each other, and there are hostages in captivity, and for a nation who has hostages in captivity, and these hostages are not beyond the sea, are not far away. For those who live near the border in the kibbutzim from which many were kidnapped, it's 5 kilometers away, 3 kilometers away. And the fact that they are so near and yet so far, it's simply killing us as a nation. And we are a nation in grief. And if you come to Israel and you walk on the street, this is not the same place that used to be. People are sadder, people have aged a lot in these last 20 months. Not us, just us, the families, but the average Israeli citizen is in shock, is grieving, even if he didn't know personally someone who was fallen, who was kidnapped. The fact that we talk about hostages all the time, and every soldier who falls, they show his face on the news, people feel like they know them. People feel like they know those who have fallen. And because we are such a small country, you always know someone who has died, or who was kidnapped, who was lost, whose friend was killed because of a terror attack, because of some sort of another terrible accident. And again, everything we said all leads to the same point. Just like it started, and there was before and now during, this has to end. This simply has to end. Because until it ends, Israel will drift away from what it used to be, and what it's supposed to be. The homeland of the Jewish people, the place when they can feel secured and feel like they belong there. And the fact that it isn't the situation anymore, and people don't feel safe to walk the streets anymore, meaning that we're very far from where we're supposed to be.
Thank you.
Just to end one sentence on that. Beyond all that, our government just don't care about it. Simple as that. They totally ignore Israeli public opinion. They are continuing with their doings. They are for surviving for themselves. They don't care what the Israeli public thinks.
I'd like to open it up for a few questions from all of you. Now, the only thing I ask is that they be true questions as opposed to short statements. So please make sure that you're asking a question. Yeah, Jennifer. I'm curious. Oh, no, they can't hear you unless you...
I'm just curious if Nimrod has a favorite place in Israel. A favorite place in Israel, just as a way to connect it, for me at least, so I can think about him and think about wherever that town or bar or I don't know.
Yeah, I will just say, we live in Rehovot. It's a city a bit south of Tel Aviv. Nimrod was born in the same house we are living now. So Nimrod's life center is Rehovot, and the center of that center is our house. in Rehovot. So his center of life is our house.
I hope and pray that the hostages continue to live and survive this. But my question is, do you encounter people who sincerely believe that the only way to prevent another attack is to destroy Hamas? And what do you say to those people?
Of course, we have, both in Israel and outside Israel. And I think that at a certain point it was logical way of thinking at the very first. And I think we've been told that this is the only sort of action we should take, that nothing like that happens again. But I think the reality shows a different picture. First of all, at the 7th of October, Hamas has 20,000 active militants or terrorists. During the last hostage deal, meaning this February, Hamas said 20,000 terrorists. So you can ask, how does it make sense? Because we killed a lot of terrorists, but they still have the same amount. Hamas recruits and Hamas rebuilds. And Israel has been providing Hamas for arms and aid. So if that truly was the goal of eliminating Hamas, and we've been doing it for 20 months, how can Hamas still have the same numbers? Last week, or I think this week, we were told, and it was confirmed by the Israeli government, that the Israeli army is been arming an ISIS-affiliated militia inside Gaza to fight Hamas. An attempt to spark some sort of a civil war inside Gaza, to decentralize or destabilize the situation in Gaza. And again, I have to ask, if the goal is really to neutralize the danger and the threat from coming to us from Gaza, why are we providing Gazans an ISIS-affiliated militia inside Gaza with AK-47 assault rifles and money in cash, millions of dollars in cash? So the same people who've been telling us that we have only one way that we can take this and we can manage this with brute force and showing no sign of weakness, has been doing in the same time things that are 180 degrees from that way. And we believed them in the first and said, yeah, okay, maybe we should enter Gaza and fight them with all that we have. But it's been 1 month and 2 months and 6 months and a year and a half and almost 2 years inside, and there is no, we don't see the end. Soldiers are being killed in the very same places, very same spots where soldiers were being killed a year ago. So if we're entering and exiting and re-entering, and soldiers are still being killed, and hostages are still being killed, and none of us, both Israelis and outside Israel, we don't see the end, or there is no concrete goal to achieve, when they can always tell us we need to continue the war and nothing changes. This is not a way of going on. We cannot go on. Maybe we need to replace the leadership for another one who can manage that. Maybe we need to stop, to halt everything we're doing and rethink what we're doing, and take a different sort of action. Maybe right now we're losing international support, we're losing the world against us, and we're missing opportunity with the normalization in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the new Middle East that is being reshaped right now. We're not a part of it. So saying we need to continue the war and fight the war was true at a certain point, but we often believe that this war is simply an open check, that we can continue as long as we deem required and we seem fit, but we tend to forget the prices that we're paying as a nation, as a country, as the Jewish people, both in good people being lost and being killed, in international opportunities, in international relationships, and in soldiers being killed. I think that the best way to eliminate Hamas is to talk about the day after, to get modern Arab forces in Arab countries with the help of the US administration and the European Union's help to rebuild Gaza and do denazification and radicalization of the Gazans and simply rebuild a sustainable place for Gazans to live. You cannot simply kill the last Hamas terrorist. You cannot find and eliminate the very last militant or find the very last assault rifle and then you say, we're done. You have to find and build something different. Otherwise, which is going to be the same thing over and over again, the next 7th of October will happen with the same ISIS-affiliated militia being armed right now in Israel. It doesn't matter if it happens by Hamas or a different armed group, a threat is a threat, for that matter.
Just in short, I just want to give another angle, a comparison angle. We had a war with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is a stronger terrorist organization, and Hezbollah was not eliminated, and Israel went to ceasefire with Hezbollah. If it could be done with Hezbollah, why shouldn't it be done with Hamas? And in Hezbollah case, Israel let the Lebanon army go and replace Hezbollah. And Israel, it doesn't let anyone go and replace Hamas. That's why Hamas keep on coming back. So it's a political issue. Our government has an interest in Gaza. We don't have, our government doesn't have interest in Lebanon. That's why it was settled in Lebanon, but not in Gaza. Adding to that, that in Gaza we have hostages and not in Lebanon.
You mentioned the fact that Israelis do not see what is happening in Gaza, all the people being killed, children, etc. What is the media doing? Do they challenge Netanyahu? Do they challenge his cabinet members? I mean, what is the media environment in your country?
So I'll say that in the mainstream media channels, you don't see the photos. I mean, right now, in the last 2 weeks, we're starting to see some sort of change in policy where they do show some things, but we have to say that regardless of the fact that we don't see the photos from Gaza or truly being explained what is happening inside Gaza, the majority of the Israelis, between 70 and 80%, are consistently supporting the end of the war. And I think that if the public knew what is happening inside Gaza, more of them would do so. 80% of Israelis want to see the end of the war, and the majority of Israelis, more than 3/4, starting to realize that the war is being prolonged because of political reasons. Because those who brought upon us the 7th of October are still governing, still have the power, are still in the very same offices and hold the same positions. And they know, and we know, that once the war ends, we'll start to investigate what really happened and who's really responsible. And there will be re-elections, and those responsible will stand trial. So we're in this sort of complicated situation when they're trying to hold power and the people of Israel are starting to realize that we've been lied to and we've paid a heavy toll because of that. We've been trying as hostage families to show to the people of Israel what is happening and show to the people of the world that the Israeli people is not the Israeli government. The fact that the Israeli government blocks any sort of talks about peace or is trying to justify bombing of children and civilians, saying this is acceptable, and it no longer is, or showing no sympathy for the other side whatsoever. We've been trying to convey a different perspective or different way of looking at the Israeli people, of the Jewish people, who are faithful, compassionate, empathetic towards the other side. Killing children and killing civilians, which it happens because of the war, it does. But doing so will not bring my brother back. It can only endanger him and maybe hurt him too. So I think we see a shift more recently in Israel when people truly start to realize what is happening and are calling for both the end of the war and a hostage deal. But it's something that the Israeli people struggle with, because when you realize that you've been lied to, you've been manipulated, you maybe start to realize, and that's a hard notion to think about, that maybe people died for nothing. And that's a very hard thing to accept as a nation, especially a grieving nation like us.
So, Sue over here, and then Boaz. Another question, I think.
I'll just talk really quickly. Yehuda, I believe we met you at your first trip to the States. Am I right, Vered? It was in Aviva Kempner's. And, you know, I can't believe you're still having to do this. So it's a chaval. Can you tell us what you're doing here in the States, who you're meeting with, and is there anybody we all can, you know, write to help pursue back up what you're doing with the politicians?
I'll start with the general purpose. We're actually going everywhere we can, in Israel, around the world, the States, Europe, to advocate for ending the war and releasing the hostages. Now, as my son said, Yotam, we need outside sources to force our government to force, emphasizing force, our government to end the war and go for a hostage deal. So every meeting, every talk in the media, with people, with government officials, with representative of international organization, can and will and hope it will help to push for that. So in particular here in Washington, of course Washington is the capital of the United States where the administration sits. We are talking to anyone we can, starting from congressmen, senators, of course communities, organizations, especially Jewish organizations, trying to get as close as possible to people from the administration. We actually did it today. We met with Martin Marks, the advisor, Trump's advisor for the Jewish community. We're trying to get to anyone who can help us advocate, simple as that, help us advocate for ending the war, getting a hostage deal, and putting it or pushing it on our government.
Different ambassadors make a difference depending upon who happens to be the ambassador at the time. Currently, the U.S. ambassador is Governor Huckabee, and I'm wondering what role he is playing in helping bring the hostages home or not, and are there other countries whose ambassadors are either helping or not helping end the war and bring the hostages home?
I don't know specifically about the ambassador, but a lot of countries take place in this effort. I think the major ones are the US and countries in the EU, who also have dual citizenships, of hostages with dual citizenships. Just to elaborate of what my father said, and it connects to what you asked about communities in other countries. Because we need external pressure on our government, I think the Jewish people, and this is what we've been doing, Jewish communities have a lot of power or emphasis regarding other countries and their relations to Israel, especially the US. The fact that the Jews in the US hold a lot of power, both in their organization and political power and finance power over the government, which controls its policy, they can change a lot. And this is what we believe. We believe that if we, and that's why we're here to the US. If we, and I think that whatever ambassador they send to Israel, he's simply the voice of the current administration, whatever it is. But if the people, Jewish communities, speak up and say what they think should happen between the US and Israel, and if the Jewish communities say enough is enough, you're killing Israel by letting it continue the war, and if big Jewish organization, AJC, ADL, all of the big and resourceful ones will say that we think that something should change, I think it will give the administration the confidence it needs to take more immense or more radical or more radical action towards our government, and I believe this is the right thing to do. Because when you have a true friend and you think he's doing something wrong, at a certain point you have to tell him, you need to stop. You're going the wrong way. You're doing damage to yourself. And we believe we've come to this point in time where the US is a true friend of Israel, and that is true, and especially the Jewish communities, like we said, we're all one people, the Jewish people, need to tell Israel you should stop. And this is what we think should be done. How to do so? With Jewish organizations, with US citizens calling to their representatives and elected officials and senators and telling them, what have you been doing to release the hostages? If all the single communities throughout the US call their elected officials and tell them, hey, we've met this week with the father of Cohen, an IDF soldier. He needs to come home. He's been in captivity for 20 months. What have you been doing this week to secure his release? If every congressman will be asked by his community, by his county, what have you been doing this week to secure a hostage deal? I think it will change a lot in the administration, and this is what we've been trying to do.
Thank you. Yotam almost answered my question, but I'll put it in a different way. The Jewish community here cares deeply about the hostages, but they also they also care deeply about the state of Israel. And traditionally, the belief is that you support whatever government is in control of Israel, because Israel is the democracy and the government is representing Israel. Do you think, so there's a dilemma here. Do you think that at this point, the best way to support the people of Israel and the hostages is maybe divorcing this notion that the state of Israel and the people of Israel are the same as the government of Israel?
Well, clearly, and we are advocating on that, is that there is a big difference between the Israeli state, the Israeli nation, and Netanyahu's government. I wouldn't have call it even the Israeli government. This government does not represent us. This government, I see it as my enemy, as our enemy. This government, beyond the fact that this heinous attack happened on their watch, this government ignores public opinion in Israel. I said at the beginning of September, 750,000 of people were out in the street. The reaction of the government, the actual reaction of Netanyahu, is to divert the situation by leaking a confidential document to a foreign media. This government does not represent the Israeli nation, does not represent the Israeli needs. This government, along with the fact that during a war is working on giving privileges to extreme religious, not to serve in the army, not to contribute to the economy and get funded by the government, or in other words, part of the people in Israel are recruited to fight, getting paid for that, paying taxes for that, and those taxes goes directly to those people who are doing nothing or just getting privileges. And the other part of the government is for fulfilling their ideological purposes, which means, well, it's more important to build settlements in the Gaza Strip, of course, alongside with build settlement in the West Bank, than to secure Israeli citizens and soldiers' lives. Or it's even worse. It's more important to build settlement in the Gaza Strip while sending soldiers to die for a needless political war. So again, we are trying to divert between the Israeli nation and the Israeli or Netanyahu's government. Netanyahu's government is not representing us, and for the Jews around the world, and in the US in particular, the message is, yes, support Israel. Israel as a state, as a nation. Criticize our government or criticize Netanyahu's government, because Netanyahu's government is working against the want and against the nation of Israel.
One last question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. First, thank you for sharing your story, and I hope that Nimrod comes back home. My son is about the same age, so I really feel you. My question is actually to you, Rabbi, and it's like, as we hear the clear voice from this family, the government is not representing the people of Israel. How we can work here in the U.S. to propagate this message and increase it and amplify it, and engage the Jewish organization, the various Jewish organizations, to act upon it.
So you can speak words of reason, which are lacking from this debate in its entirety in its version in the United States. I think Vered and I actually were at the joint Memorial Day ceremony that was held at Tiferet Israel. I'm not sure if, I think you were there. You guys were there. Laura and and Ethan were there. A young Palestinian man who's on a grad program stood up and said, we can't understand why you're more kitzoni, why you're more radical here than we are in Palestine, which was a remarkable thing to hear. And so one of the things that I want to, at least in my opinion, is that the debate as it exists in the United States of America about Israel and Palestine has gone off the rails. Such that, by the way, that political violence is now justified and is being justified. We have to up our security budget yet again. I didn't even know that was possible for the Jewish community, but here we are again. And so what I want to encourage you to do is to call Congress, members of Congress, senators, and people in the Jewish community. And I mean, honestly, it's really making me think what I'm hearing here, because the heads of major Jewish institutions are generally conservative with a small c when it comes to Israel. And they are supportive, but also quiet about their own personal convictions, because Israel's a beleaguered country. And there are plenty of people who would like to see it erased off the map. But to hear the father and brother of a hostage, a current hostage in Gaza, and speak to Israel as a friend, saying, it's wrong what you're doing, it's enough, the war needs to end, it's working against the interests. That's a message that we can deliver to people in the Jewish community, that the war is working against the interests of Israel. It will be very hard for some people to hear. But frankly, I don't mind saying it at this point in time. The death has to stop. How long will we stay in Gaza for? I want to say, as we close up tonight, that Nimrod should come home today, this very second. שהוא יחזור הביתה, ממש, ממש, ממש. שישתחרר. At the same time, we received the news in the last few days that two bodies of people who were taken on October 7th were found. One of the names was not released, the other is Yair Yaakov. And we mourn with their families and with their loved ones. Yizichram Baruch, may their memories be for a blessing. And just the incredible pain and the senselessness of the incredible pain is something that's very hard to bear. Home, and it's going to be a night for me of thinking about what we can do to continue to advocate for the hostages, but also for the madness to stop. And I do want to say thank you in particular for those of you who are members of Unacceptable here, who have been advocating for this since the beginning. Thank you all very much, and especially thanks to you, Yehuda and Yotam.